All right, well, welcome back. The last class we talked about some ethical decision making and basically gave a recap of ethics and morals and norms. And now we want to kind of put that to use in a strategy to try to make decisions and use that information to help us make good, sound decisions. And so, one model that came out is the idea of issue contingent. And this is the issue contingent model. We'll also talk about practice-based model as another form of ethical decision making. But with the issue contingent, give you kind of an overview of it. I posted a reading on it that actually is the same. It is in the reading that I provided you as well. So there's kind of two readings that you can look at that deals with issue contingent if you have questions about that to help support what we talk about today. So issue contingent model focuses on identifying characteristics of the ethical dilemma. Much like we just talked about in the last class where we look at those two variables that impact ethical decision making, we can come back and we can look at them in this example as well. So we focus on identifying characteristics of the issue, and we'll show you how we can implement those individual and situational variables as well. One of the key elements of issue contingent is the moral intensity. And basically it's a construct. A construct is basically the idea of bringing several different variables together, several different factors together, and kind of put them all together into one other variable or idea concept. In this kind, we may call it moral intensity. So moral intensity is the construct based on the strength of an issue to the individual. And we talked about individual factors, and also varies from issue to issue, situational factors. So when we look at moral intensity, it's basically based upon the idea of magnitude of the consequences. So when we talked about teleological philosophy, the teleological philosophy suggested that there's a gray area in ethics and in ethical decision making, and the more people that see this end as being a good thing, the better, right? So we said Title IX, that's a really good thing for most of the people, not all, but most. So it's the magnitude of the consequence. How important are these consequences going to be to the most people? Okay, so we have to be aware of the magnitude of the consequence. The social consensus, the amount of agreement within our organization or the community or that we're living in, depending upon what type of decisions we're making. So are more people going to be on board with it, or are more people going to look at it as being a negative? The probability of the effect, the likelihood that the decision I make is going to have the outcome, the predicted outcome that we want. So we'll look at that. The temporal immediacy. All of a sudden I'm getting bombarded with emails. Shut that down, sorry. It's off to a good start. Luckily it's not a very long one today, or at least this one. The probability of effect, we talked about how likelihood the decision is going to have the results that we want. And then the temporal immediacy, the time lapse between decision and consequence. So how long is it when I make my decision, how quickly am I going to see the return on that decision, the consequences of that decision? So that'll also impact. So some of our decisions have to be made quickly and we'll see instant results on them, good or bad. Some of them we can make our decision and it'll be dragged out and we won't actually see the outcome for later on down the line. Okay. And proximity. How close are we to the actual decision or the consequences that we're making, and those that we're affecting based upon that decision? That'll impact a lot of times the decisions that we make. If we don't feel like we have much connectedness to the people that we're making the decision, we might stray from making those ethical decisions that we have to make. So we have an idea of this moral intensity, and moral intensity, all those different factors, all those different variables build together into one variable, which we call moral intensity. And that then helps us as we go through the process of issue contingent. So moral intensity will impact the process of decision making. Okay, that's every step that we go through from here on is going to be based upon that moral intensity. So the steps to decision, we have to recognize there's a moral issue. So again, we've got to go back, look at the issue, and recognize that there is some kind of ethic or moral issue that's existing here, and we have to, again, as a starting point, we have to make sure that there is an issue, or else we're not going to do anything, right? And so we have to make sure that and recognize that there's an issue, and sometimes that doesn't happen. Make moral judgment. Understand what's right or wrong within a given context. So within the context that we're given that situation that we're in, what's the best judgment that we can make to help? So what's right or wrong here? Again, deontology, one answer, right or wrong. There's that black and white, you pick. Teleology, you got that gray area. So who's going to be the most impacted? How many people can we serve with the best there? Okay. Establish moral intent. Determine, our actions, our intention to act. Okay. So at this point, we have to recognize that there's an issue. We make a judgment of what we want to do, and then we have to actually do it. Okay. And establish that intent. Got to want to do that. Sometimes we recognize there's an issue, we want to act, and then we don't. So this one says, well, we got to recognize that moral issue, make the judgment, and then establish that intent to actually put something in place that will help us do it. Okay, and sometimes that's impacted by the situation we're in. It might be impacted by the pressure from the supervisor, career advancement. I'm afraid if I blow the whistle or I say something, then I'm not going to have an opportunity to move up within this corporation or this organization. Okay, negative media attention. Gosh, I'm going to be brought in front of the media, and this day and age, it's not always going to be. Everybody's always going to be behind you. There's going to be part of the people are going to see as bad, part of the people are going to see as good. So you just have to be aware of that. And so sometimes people cave into that pressure and don't make the next step, which is engage in the moral behavior. Okay? Implement the plan of action to solve that ethical dilemma. We see this happening time and time again. Penn State and Jerry Sandusky, a few years back, didn't handle it right. They recognized there was an issue with Sandusky and his behavior with young boys. They made a moral judgment. They understand that his actions were wrong. They some of them even said, we got to do something about this, but the way they went about it, the way they engaged in that moral behavior didn't come through. Okay, Arkansas, on the other hand, had Bobby Petrino, where Bobby was having really good success with the football team there, and then his behavior caught up with him, his immoral behavior, having an affair with one of the staff members, and a whole mess of issues that went along with that, and the university made a decision, we got to cut ties. This isn't the moral behavior or ethical behavior that we're looking for, and they got rid of him, even though he was winning. Okay? Louisville had the same issue with Rick Pitino, and for a while they stuck by him, and then eventually they had to cut ties because they had to make that moral judgment. And again, Petrino, Sandusky at Penn State under Paterno, Rick Pitino, great results on the court. Fields doing really well. Okay, but there's a lot of pressure to win in those major colleges, and the leadership had to step up and say, no, we can't stand for this, and we gotta we got to put an end to it and actually implement it eventually. The plans to get rid of those coaches. Okay. So one of the things you can look at and how this all fits together, the book that I copied for you has some good information there, and then also the another article that I posted for you shows you the contingent model. Here's the moral intensity, all those different variables fitting together in that cohort. And then here you go through each step, basically recognize the moral issue, making that moral judgment, establish moral intent, put in the behavior, and that moral intensity is going to affect each level here. But then the other thing you have to be aware of is that organizational factors will also play a part in how the group dynamics are, whether how well you can actually implement the intent or recognize that there's and get the proper right or wrong there. The socialization process and how you're socialized within the organization. The authority factors, are you afraid to act based upon the leadership there? And so those will impact those last two steps with making establishing the moral intent and the moral behavior. Okay, so that's the issue contingent model. Kind of gives you a way to go through the process and think through the process to help you better understand the decision making, at least from the ethical standpoint. The next one we're going to talk about is the practice based, and I'll keep you in suspense for a little bit longer and get that video up here for you shortly.